Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Allison. I'm a senior. I'm a peer academic coach, and then I'm also on the volleyball team, doing my 4th season.
Hi, I'm Mary Kate Salko. I'm the women's volleyball coach and SWA on campus. I'm also a 2001 graduate of FNM.
Okay, so today we're just talking about student athletes on campus and how, kind of like what they need from the Peer Resource Collective, different strategies we might be able to use with student athletes, and how like their college experience looks a little bit different. So at FNM, about 1/3 of the student body participates in athletics on campus, and that does range between like club, intramural, and varsity sports. But we do have quite a bit of students kind of identifying as an athlete on campus. So just kind of like putting that into perspective, college does look really different for student athletes. I put together kind of like a mock schedule of mine, looking at how time kind of gets taken away. I don't know how we want to show.
You want to just turn it around? I'll just zoom in.
So just like looking at, this is just like my class schedule for the week.
Can you put your screen up a little bit?
Yes, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. And just kind of like going away, you see this is practice, games. This is like my work schedule for this job. A lot of student athletes also have on-campus jobs. And then this is just kind of going down the stuff you might not think about, like extra reps if you can make it, team lifts, setting up, putting things away, travel time, and then putting in things like social hours. You kind of get a schedule that looks like this. So when you subtract all that time taken away from what you have is like labeled free time, you end up with 34 hours that's not taken away. And then if you do the math with the 1 hour of class equals 2 hours of like out of class work, that ends up being about 34. So based on that, like if everything works perfectly and you sacrifice nothing for a student athlete, you're working from 8 a.m. till 12 a.m. every single day with no breaks, except for like this little bit on Sunday and this little bit on Saturday. So obviously that's not sustainable. You can't kind of just look at a student athlete and say like all of these things have to get done, because it's not possible. So finding extra time and little bits of time to kind of make up what they might be losing is really important, and just being a little bit more creative. So just kind of like what we need from Peer Resource Collective is that like first things first is like quitting is not an option. There are a lot of benefits to sport. It's more than just taking time away from your schedule. A big part of it is like the mental health and balance for a college student. It gives people a sense of identity. Like when I introduce myself in class, I'm like, hi, I'm Allison and I'm on the volleyball team. Like it's a huge part of who I am. I know it's a huge part of all student athletes. It gives a source of confidence outside of the classroom, which is huge. It helps promote like leadership and group skills. It's where people are seeing like a lot of success, again, more confidence. And then for a lot of student athletes, like this is their social time. This is where they're seeing their friend group, their support system on campus. And then like they're not having that like 3 days a week going out or like having long lunch hours and stuff like that. Practice is the time where they're being able to like see their friends and hang out and like goof around and stuff like that. I don't know if you want to add anything on mental health.
One of the things I think is important to talk about when it comes to student athletes is just like how outcome oriented they are. So I think any coach would tell you, especially at Franklin and Marshall, that we struggle a little bit with getting our student athletes to focus on process and to focus on, it's not about getting a 4.0, it's not about getting straight A's, it really is about kind of controlling the effort and focus that you put into your work. And we realize that they have less time than most other people do. So one of the things that we've really tried to implement into our program, which I realize does take a little bit of extra time, it takes time out of practice, it takes time away from getting reps and game planning, but incorporating some mindfulness and kind of mental health work into our daily practices. I think that all the things that Allison said about playing a sport is a huge part of a student athlete's identity. It gives them confidence, but sometimes it also can tear away at them a little bit. It can eat away at their confidence if they're not having success on the court, if they're not, if they're just not seeing the results that they like to on the court. Sometimes that can bleed into other areas of their life. So there are going to be times when a student athlete comes to you and is like, I'm struggling in class, like I'm not playing on my team, I'm a mess. And I think that it's really important to realize that student is playing that sport for a reason, and we kind of have to figure out a way to help them do the good aspects of being on this team and playing this sport outweigh the things that are bothering them right now. But we've, I think, done a lot of good work in incorporating the mindfulness training and incorporating just a focus on mental health. We have little check-ins every 3 weeks in our program where we can talk about volleyball. It might be 5 minutes of volleyball conversation, but then the other 25 minutes are, how's school? How are you doing personally? How is mental health for you right now? What can we as coaches do to support you? And I think some other coaches are having those conversations with their athletes as well. So, know that coaches want to partner with people who are doing academic and emotional support on campus, because I think we really do care about not only the identities of our athletes, but also how they're doing as people.
Are those check-ins like one-on-one with you?
Mm-hmm.
That's nice.
Yeah. So it's once every 3 weeks in season. So I think we've had 3 or 4 since the start of the season. And it's good because, like, if they want to bring up the sport and talk about playing time or talk about other things, they have the option of doing that. But we usually start with, okay, how are you feeling about your effort in classes? Like, are you forming relationships with your professors? How is outside of academic stuff going for you? Are you struggling with anything? Are there resources on campus that you're not accessing right now that could help you control that? And just in speaking with some other coaches on campus, I think coaches are realizing, especially because of the last year, that all this stuff is really important. And a lot of the kids that come into our programs as first years are really smart kids, but they don't know how to manage their time because they didn't have to do it in their senior year of high school. It was kind of like fake school.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my first years are struggling with that. They're like, I've not been in a normal school setting where I had deadlines and I had things expected of me in almost 2 years. So I think most coaches are realizing these kids need more help than we were prepared to give them. So for me, that's why this program is so valuable, because it doesn't matter if they're really smart, if they don't know how to study for a test or how to structure writing a paper or just managing time, it's not going to matter how well they know the material.
Yeah, so,
I was just gonna say, plus those check-ins there's other team building things
Mhm.
that I know, particularly you guys do, I'm sure other teams do, but I think sometimes students just don't know who their support system is. And unfortunately, I think some students come in without much of a support system outside of F&M, so that's just such a nice way to be really explicit, like, I'm your support system, this team is your support system, so that, if they don't know where else to go,
Yeah.
they know that you are there,
Yeah.
which is really nice.
And I think we end every conversation with, like, what do you need from us?
Mm-hmm.
And often I get the same. Every time I have a meeting with Allison, it's, well, what do you need from me? And so that way we're just being really clear with each other about, like, well, I need you to do this in practice. Well, I need you to say this to me when I'm stressed out at practice. And we don't really have many communication errors as a result.
Yeah, that's a great model for lots of different areas, not just athletics.
okay, so kind of looking at the Peer Resource Collective and like what student athletes are really needing from you guys is that, well, we already talked about how quitting's not an option. A lot of times when a student will come in and they're like, oh, I just don't have time to do this, you can find the time, and it's not necessarily always the sport that's the problem. A lot of student athletes, like, I hear it all the time where they're like, I'm way more successful academically when I'm in season than when I'm out of it, because they need that, like, structure and that I need to get this work done now because I practice later, instead of saying, like, oh, I have time later. So having that kind of, like, as a reminder, and that, like, the sport isn't necessarily the problem. Also just, like, being a space for venting. If a student's coming in, sometimes they just need to, like, get it off their chest and vent about it. You don't always need to have a solution. You might just need to, like, be there, talk it through with them. And then try to kind of think about an athletic team and, like, practice and stuff like that. That commitment, almost the same as a class. Like, if a student comes in and they're talking to you and they're venting about a class and how they just don't have time to get the papers done, or their professor, they don't like them, the option isn't like, okay, just drop the class. Like, that's not the solution. You say, like, why don't you have a conversation with your professor, or let's make an appointment here, or find the time to get this done. It's the same exact thing with teams. It seems a little bit different because it's not like we're such an academic based school, but really if you're like looking at all the pros that sports and like being on a team and that part of your identity can bring to it, and how much losing that would like be a problem for so many students, you really do have to think of it as something that's like right up there with their classes. Again, like there is time, it just looks different for a student athlete. For like most students, if they have class all day and there's like an hour break between classes, that's when they're like, I'm just going to take a break, I'm going to eat lunch, hang out before my next class. For a student athlete, that's like grabbing food and sitting down and getting homework done, because you're not going to have that time later. So just making sure that like you're not losing the little tiny opportunities, because you're not going to see the blocks of time that are like 4 hours long in the afternoon every day where you can get where you can get that done. And then another thing is that the pros and cons of like a sport look really different for each athlete, but something that's really important is that like if a student comes to you and they're struggling with academics and with athletics, it shouldn't make a difference if there's someone who like plays or if their team is successful. Like your answer shouldn't change and be like, oh, well, you're not even a starter, so like why is it that important to you? Like, we really have to stress how important all the other things are, like having that support system on campus, getting confidence, a social outlet. All of those other things are so much more important than whether or not they play, or whether or not their team is winning all the time, or if it's like guys team versus girls team. All those things really shouldn't matter and shouldn't play a part in whether or not a student is quitting a team. There are times when like other conversations need to be had, and like when that does start to look different, like if students are failing out of their classes and they really are like taking advantage of all their time, then obviously things need to change, and maybe you do start discussing taking a step back or dropping the athletics. If they're losing sleep, or if it's causing a toll on their physical and mental health as opposed to helping, that's another thing we have to look for. And then again, kind of thinking of it as a class. Like there are some classes where a student, it's harming mental health, physical health, they're losing sleep, all of that. And sometimes it's like, okay, you need to drop this class. And sometimes it's just like, just get through it. The next 2 weeks are going to be horrible, but it's going to be worth it. That kind of thing. It's the same exact thing with the sport. Like they might be struggling right now, but you really have to look to the future and see like long term, is that going to be more helpful or hurtful? And then something that MK had talked about is just changing the mindset. The students coming in and they're just feeling horrible about their sport and their success in it, and it all comes down to whether or not they're on the court. You kind of have to sit back and like maybe sit with them and identify the reasons why they're playing. Like if they come to you and they're just like devastated because they're not playing, you can ask like, is that the only reason you're on the team, is for playing time? And kind of helping them to shift that like outcome oriented mindset that so many student athletes have, and being like, okay, well, it's giving you like physical activity, it's mental health, it's friendship, it's all these other things, and maybe whether or not they're on the court, like that can't be whether or not they are getting anything positive out of the experience of being on an athletic team. So really work hard to kind of remind them of the positive aspects. And if they can't find any, then again, like it's a different conversation, but making sure that we kind of try to stay away from that outcome-oriented mindset. I don't know if you wanted anything else on that.
Yeah, I one of the things that we have our players do at the beginning of preseason is we have them actually like write a letter to themselves, and it's called Why I Play. And we're gonna be revisiting those letters probably later this week or early next week. And I think it's really easy to articulate why you do something when like the sun is up and everything is rosy and it's preseason and you have all of your goals are still on the board. There's infinite possibility for you personally and for your team, but it's really hard to remember those things when it's the end of the season, it's grind time, and maybe things are not going as well as you would like academically. So we encourage our players to write that letter at the beginning of preseason when they're in a good mindset, so that when things are not going as well, we can refer to that and be like, okay, this is why I do this. And sometimes for kids, the reasons why they play are enough to overcome, like to compensate for the hardship. But for some of them, it's not. And coaches have those conversations with players all the time. Like, I don't want somebody on my team who is miserable and who is struggling academically. They're here for school. Like, we recruited them, we helped them get here. But at the end of the day, it's not going to say volleyball on their diploma. It's going to say whatever they're majoring in, and they're going to graduate school for whatever it is. So I think just remembering the reasons why they play and helping them refer to that, like, I would recommend any athlete do that at the beginning of the season, because there's going to come a time when you're like, why am I doing this? Even if it's just like, oh, it's a 6 a.m. lift and I'm tired, I don't want to get out of bed, like, this is why I do this. And the other thing Allison talked about earlier was, like, sometimes student athletes just need a place to vent. So we've worked really hard on our team in making the locker room kind of a sacred space. And venting is okay, but complaining is not. So we've had years where the locker room was a pretty toxic environment because people would bring the stress of their day into the locker room. And they'd be like, I don't really want to practice today, I don't feel like being here, and it's contagious. So our kids are programmed to not do that. They're programmed to come into the locker room and to take a deep breath and to be like, this is a sacred space. I'm not going to bring anybody down. Like, my goal is to be, like, we call it being green. Like, we're going to be green today instead of being red. And so they often don't have anybody they can complain to or vent to. So having this extra layer of, like, can I just vent? And then having a peer academic coach go, man, that sucks. I hear you. Okay, now let's move forward. Let's figure this out. I don't, like, I always think about that with our kids because they're really good about not complaining to each other. So I can talk, do you want me to talk a little bit about kind of extra expectations?
Can I ask a question first, just
yeah.
about a couple of the things that you talked about? Mary Kate, you mentioned like helping encourage students, the students that you work with, the athletes, to recognize that there's a process and the product isn't the final piece, right? And then Allison, you talked about a little bit about that, similar to playing, right? Like being, like, winning the game really why you're in this sport. Can you both just talk a little bit more about how you kind of process that through with athletes, the academic part and the, you know, sport related part?
Yeah, I can start, I guess.
Yeah.
So, like, kind of the theme of our season has been, like, process. Like, we want to feel good about how we're playing, not necessarily the result. And I think last night was a perfect example of that. So we played a match last night. We didn't win, but we controlled a lot of the things that we had been working hard on really, really well. So we had a lot of process-oriented goals. They're like, okay, we want to pass really well. So our passing numbers were really good. We wanted to, you know, contain their offense. So their offensive numbers weren't as good as they normally are. So while those are, like, tiny outcome goals, they're really process-oriented, because if you add all those things up, like, we had a chance to win the match as a result. We didn't do it. But I felt, like, energized by that loss last night. Whereas we played on Saturday and beat a team that was just not very good. And I was like, you know, like, we won and I felt like crap. We lost and I felt energized. And I think we try, and I don't think my assistant coach and I always do the best job of getting them to understand it's about how you do it. It's not about the end result. Because I believe that if you control the effort, the focus, the attitude, the energy, all of those things, the result is going to be whatever it is. Sometimes a team is just going to beat you. They're going to have a better day. But if you've done everything you can to control the process of the game and how you prepare for it, then you've won and you've done what you can. And we try to approach practices that way. And I think some days we're really good at it and some days we're not. Like, coaches have days where we're, like, completely outcome oriented and we're, like, monsters. And then other days where we're like, process. So we go like this as well. I don't know what you would want to add to that.
I mean, on more of, like, an individual level, I mean, I've had conversations with teammates where they're really struggling with that, with like outcome, whether it's like after a game where they played, they just didn't think they did their best, or like if they're struggling with playing time and not getting in as much as they want and stuff like that, like that's always going to be something that's on people's mind. And you can't just be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, like don't care about it, because like being on a team like implies like you have that competitive spirit, you want to be on the court, you want to win, and all those things are amazing. But just kind of like reminding them that like it is a team sport, you're there for the team, and while you have like individual goals, they might have to like shift slightly. Like you're still working hard to get on the court, you're still, or like the field or whatever it is. But just kind of like remembering that you're there for more than just your own like personal outcome goals. Like you can just shift those to like getting better, or like all these like little things. But there have been a lot of girls on our team or like other teams where they're really struggling with, well, I'm just like not seeing what I want to see out of like my experience, or I'm not like getting the outcomes or the tangible goals that they were kind of hoping to get. Just kind of helping people shift with that kind of mindset and be like, okay, well, you've gotten so much better at this, or you've made these friends and you have this support system on campus now. Just kind of reminding them that like there's so much more to being on a team and being an athlete at F&M than just whether or not you're on the court playing. And a lot of times it's really, really easy to forget about those reasons and kind of take them for granted when the only thing you're focused on is like the outcome of what you're doing. So just kind of like having them step back and kind of view the whole big picture, as opposed to just like focusing on one thing that maybe isn't working, is huge.
The other thing I would add to that is, like we try to do this with our players, both in the sport, but also in like how they approach their academics. So we are big on like, what are our 3 outcome goals for the season? And more important than that, like what are the 15 process-oriented goals that we have to have? Like these are must-dos every single day. And so like the outcome goals, they're obvious. Like they're, you know, you want to win the conference, you want to reach NCAAs, you want to do these things. But it's the how are you going to get there? And so we try to translate that thought process to, okay, you want to get an A in this class, or you want to get an A-. How are you going to do it? So we help them figure out like, what are the things you can control? Okay, I can go to class every day. Sounds like a very simple thing, but I'm amazed at how many kids don't do that, right? So go to class, pay attention in class. Stop by and have a conversation with your professor after class, even if it's for 2 minutes, to say like, hey, I really enjoyed the lecture today. Professors are going to remember you if you interact with them, and it's not always answering a question correctly. It might be asking a question. It might just be commenting on something after class, going to office hours, you know, going to tutoring, using resources on the team. And to get them to understand that they have control over all of those things is really powerful. Because sometimes they're going to do all those things and they're going to get a B. And we're like, yes, you rock that B. Let's throw a party for you. Like, you worked really hard for that B. And, like, that's the outcome, and that is what it is. It might not be what they wanted, but they did everything they could to control the process. Mm-hmm. And so we try to mirror those things with academics and with how we approach improvement in volleyball. Because, like, we're going to have a chance at our outcome goals. We still have a chance at pretty much all of them right now. But whether we reach them is going to depend on the process this week and next week.
Yeah, that's also like perfectly aligned with the growth mindset, right? Mm-hmm. Of putting so much effort, emphasis on the process, but not ignoring the product, mm-hmm. right? And I think that Carol Dweck, who like developed this idea of the growth mindset, has come out saying that it's been misunderstood as like effort is all that matters, right? Just work hard and that's all that matters. But in fact, the goal does actually matter, because the goal is what gets you to your next place, right? But I think it seems like you guys have captured like the right essence of the growth mindset and put it in both academic and, you know, athletic lenses really nicely.
Yeah. I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about as a coach, so Allison talked a lot about time and schedule and kind of what it looks like, and it was really interesting for me to see as you clicked each layer. I was like, oh my goodness. because I forget what that feels like. And as a student athlete here at F&M, like I had a lot of those things, but I didn't have everything. And so just to see that like giant block of time that's just off the table gave me heart palpitations a little bit. So now I'm going to pile it on even more and talk about the other expectations that coaches have of their players. So for a lot of students, it's fine to not sleep. It's fine to eat crap and not take care of your body very well, to not drink water, to survive on coffee and like energy drinks and stuff like that. But one of our expectations of our players is that you get enough sleep, you prioritize it. Like, I don't care if you're studying at 2 a.m., it's time to go to bed because you got to be ready for class the next day. We expect them to fuel their body with protein and to drink a lot of water and to do all these other things that I don't think other students give a second thought. Like, yeah, I'm going to have pizza for lunch and dinner every day. I'm going to subsist on coffee and energy drinks all day, every day. Like, they don't have that option. They can't do that. So in addition to all of those time constraints that they have, it's now like, oh, I've got to go home from practice and I've got to cook myself a meal. I have to like make chicken, or I have to prepare a salad or something that is going to fuel their body with something good, instead of just going to the college center and getting chicken tenders every night. Like, they can't do that. So the self-care part of it, like, that is a part of our check-in, is like, what is self-care like for you right now? Are you making time for yourself? Are you going on walks? Are you watching Netflix for a half hour? Because that's what recharges your battery. So we're also telling them, on top of everything else, like, you need to make time for self-care, which I think stresses them out even more sometimes. Like, okay, I'll watch Netflix, I promise. I'm like, it's not supposed to be stressful. It's supposed to be enjoyable. Sit alone in your room with a candle and like listen to music. I don't know. But they're trying to fit all this stuff in, and then they're being told that self-care is important. And sometimes I feel like an a-hole telling them that, because I'm like, you don't have time. You would have to give up a half hour of sleep to do self-care. Is sleep self-care? I don't know. So, we have these conversations with them and we tell them these are our expectations, while fully realizing self-care is going to go out the window. Sleep, nutrition, it's going to go out the window as soon as the stress level rises. Mm-hmm. And they've got to be in peak physical condition. They've got to be ready to go at all times. And I think even like in a sport like soccer, the amount of running that you have to do, good Lord. So on top of all of that, coaches are then saying, like, you've got to be taking really good care of yourself while having absolutely no time to do it. Mm-hmm. So just another little thing I thought I'd throw in there.
And then if you skimp on the, like, taking care of yourself as you work out, right, then you get injured.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you're in a whole other stress place.
Well, I don't know what it's been like for soccer, but we've had 5 weeks straight where we've had people miss games because of being sick. It's bronchitis, it's upper respiratory infections, it's pneumonia. And I think a lot of it had to do with just kids feeling really run down. Like, they have not had this grind of a schedule for 2 years. And everybody's immune systems are a little wonky right now. Mm-hmm. So we've got kids coughing all over each other in practice, and like, it's hard to figure out, like, when should I stay home versus go and cough all over everybody and then make someone else sick and risk making myself feel worse. So we've had days where it's like, just stay home, like, don't come.
Yeah, but something that Amy had brought up is just like staying on top of it, like not letting it pile up.
Yeah.
Self-care can't be a thing that you do when you're having like a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be a maintenance thing. It's easier to use that in like a injury setting. Like, I know for me and for other people on the volleyball team, and I'm sure all the teams here on F&M, like, we go see the trainer like every day, and like that takes time out of my schedule to like go sit with our athletic trainer for like 30-45 minutes every day. But at the same time, like, I don't want me to not go see her and then 2 weeks later, like, I can't play, or I have to now see her for like an hour and a half every day to go through physical therapy and stuff like that. So reminding people that it doesn't need to be this whole sit down self-care for 2 hours. Like, 15 minutes is enough if they're doing it consistently, and just reminding them to like take time for themselves, even if it means like, okay, go take like a 20-minute shower and just like really like take that time to be alone and like think about things you need to think about. But making sure that it's more of a maintenance thing instead of like going backwards solving a problem for self-care is really, really big.
Yeah, so instead of it being reactionary to something going wrong, it's preventative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there anything that we're forgetting to bring up? I'm looking through my notes and I'm not seeing anything.
I don't think so.
But,
I was kind of counting on like question
I
time.
know.
Well, is there anything, I don't know, is there anything that you would add in
Yeah.
as a fellow student athlete?
I don't know, I think you guys covered it pretty well, so.
Yeah, this was pretty comprehensive, and Allison, can we like pull your computer closer, because I couldn't get the
For like
the layering very well on
Mhm.
here. Maybe we can just go through that again. Also, my
Yes.
phone fell over at one point. Filmmaking was not my major in college.
Okay, can you see it okay?
Yeah, really close here.
I can also always share this and
Yeah,
share it
actually,
with
that
the
would
video.
be helpful too. Okay, can you just talk us through that again a little
Yeah.
bit?
So this is just my class schedule. It looks a little bit different because I'm a science major, so I do have like lab blocks in there. But this semester I'm only taking one, and for a lot of students, like they're taking 2 to 3. So this is just practice. I made this earlier in the year when we were having like 3 games a week typically, but for most teams it's 2 to 3 games, except for like football I think has 1 game a week. But that's what practice looks like, and then we factor in the games. This is an on-campus job. I think I have like 5 hours in there. I know some student athletes are working up to 10, so it's very variable for that. This is extra reps, which for a lot of student athletes isn't an optional thing for them. They want to go in and do that. So that's something that can be taken out for time, but it's also something that's important to a lot of student athletes. This is team meals before games, making sure that you're fueled for that. Like those are pretty much mandatory, just making sure you're ready. This is lifting, just once a week, kind of after practice right there. And then additional things like meetings, like we meet for this, but then I also have like a leadership meeting on our team every week. And then I also including like going to the training room in that as well. This is setting up, cleaning up, and travel time. Like that takes another 30 minutes if you're including your shower and putting all of our equipment away. I made both of the weekday games home, so I didn't include travel, but then Saturday I made it, like added additional time in for travel, because a lot of times you're doing an additional like hour and a half, 2 hours to get to those games. I threw in just some social and downtime Sunday morning, Saturday night, because that's typically not a time students do use. But again, it's only till like 10:30 on Sunday, and it starts I think at like 8:30, 9 o'clock on Saturday. And so then just looking at everything, I have kind of what is being taken out of your schedule. So your week starts if you're going from 8 to 12 every day with 112 free time hours. And then you can just see how quickly that kind of all goes away. And then if you're doing an hour in class, 2 hours outside of class, you're doing about 34 hours, at least for my schedule. And obviously if you're looking at that, that takes up every bit of time you have except for those marked down like social hours. So obviously things need to be sacrificed, but it's just kind of an idea on how many different things student athletes are having to juggle in their schedule.
Yeah. And so no wonder sleep is so easily sacrificed, because that's like one of the only areas that you have a little bit of control over, right? You can dig into that time a little bit.
Seeing that like giant block of red.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
the red.
that's daunting,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, any last thoughts?
I mean, one of the things that I'm working on and Allison's going to be working on is just encouraging more student athletes to take advantage of this program. We're really trying to promote it. Allison is scheduling kind of like a little pilot meeting with our men's and women's basketball first years.
Great.
So one of the ideas moving forward is just, should we deliberately set up with all sports teams, like this is an introduction for your first years. This is the program, these are the resources that are available. Like they can do it or not, but we want them to know that this is here, because I think that for some kids it's shameful to ask for help, even though I think here, like, we've normalized it pretty well. I think that F&M like really promotes all the resources that they have available very well, but I do think that there is this stigma associated with admitting that you need help academically, and then even more so that like, oh, I don't even know how to manage my own time, like
Yeah.
I can do it. So if we can normalize it by saying like this is going to be like PAC 101 for every first year student athlete, they're just going to be like, oh, this is what we do.
Mhm.
So that might take a few years,
Mhm.
but I envision 3-4 years down the road that it's just a thing. Like, okay, it's preseason time. Can we have Amy come in, or can we have one of the PAC tutors come in and during preseason and do a session with our kids,
Mhm.
and scheduling a time for the fall, winter, and spring sports to do it. I think that would be really helpful. I think it would allow the students to feel like less shame about approaching it, and it would, like, you're doing such good work to try to promote it. We want to see students getting in the door and really getting the help that they need.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think too it helps to experience it, because when it's, I think I find a lot of students are like, what could you possibly say about time management? Like you just do things when you have time, you know, or whatever. But there's a whole process we go through, and it's a long, detailed process. You can see like Allison kind of ran through it pretty quickly, but time management isn't always simple, and sometimes you can't see what you're living. You know, you need someone's outside perspective to see for you, or to help you see the space a little bit more. But I think that would be great.
Anything else?
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
I'll make this video available for everyone else.